I set out on what was supposed to be a peaceful hike, camera in hand, ready to capture the beauty of a remote forest that I'd heard so much about. The locals had warned me, saying it wasn't just any forest. It was an old, haunted place where strange things happened. They told tales of shadowy figures and eerie sounds, but I brushed it off as nothing more than superstition. I wanted to see it for myself, to find something unique and add a bit of adventure to my photography. The trail started out normal enough, winding through tall trees and patches of sunlight filtering through the canopy. Birds chirped, leaves rustled. Everything was as you'd expect in a serene forest. But as I ventured deeper, a strange silence settled over the woods. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. My footsteps became the only sound, crunching against the dry leaves and twigs beneath my boots. The deeper I went, the darker it became, even though it was still midday. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something, an outline of a structure hidden among the trees. I veered off the path, pushing through the underbrush until I came face to face with it. An old cabin, worn and forgotten. The wood was rotting, the windows cracked, and the door hung slightly open, as if inviting me in. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a strange unease wash over me. The air around the cabin was colder, heavier, as if it was a place where time had stopped. I stood there, staring at the cabin, feeling like I was caught in a trance. Something about the place made it impossible to look away. It wasn't just the way the cabin seemed to blend into the forest, almost camouflaged by the creeping vines and moss. It was the eerie quiet that surrounded it. I could no longer hear the birds or the rustling leaves. It was as if the forest itself had gone silent, holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. I approached the door cautiously, every step echoing loudly in the stillness. My heart pounded in my chest, but my curiosity pushed me forward. As I reached out to touch the door, I noticed the wood was damp and cold, as if it had been untouched for years. The hinges groaned when I pushed the door open, the sound breaking the silence like a scream. I hesitated on the threshold, feeling a chill creep up my spine. It was dark inside, with only slivers of light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. Stepping inside, the temperature dropped instantly. The air was musty and thick, filled with the scent of damp wood and decay. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, revealing old, broken furniture scattered across the room. There was a fireplace against one wall, its hearth filled with ash and soot, as though it had been used recently. The thought made my skin crawl. Who would have been here, in this forgotten place, in the middle of the forest? I ventured further in, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that covered the floor. My flashlight beam landed on an old wooden table, cluttered with strange objects, rusted tools, broken bottles, and what looked like animal bones. I felt a surge of unease. The cabin was far older than I had imagined, and it seemed as though someone or something had been using it for some kind of ritual. As I stood there, taking it all in, I heard it, a faint creaking noise, like the sound of floorboards shifting under weight. I turned around quickly, my flashlight sweeping across the room, but there was nothing there. The cabin was empty. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, hiding in the shadows, waiting. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched and decided to explore the rest of the cabin. My instincts screamed for me to leave, but something kept me there, urging me to go deeper. I moved toward a narrow hallway at the back of the room, the walls lined with old photographs and paintings, their frames covered in dust and cobwebs. I paused to look at them, my flashlight casting eerie shadows across the faces staring back at me. They were black and white portraits, faded with age, but the eyes seemed almost alive, following my every move. I stepped into the hallway, and as soon as I did, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, almost icy, and the shadows around me began to shift. At first, I thought it was just my flashlight playing tricks on me, but then I saw them, shadows that moved independently of the light. They slithered along the walls and floor, forming vague, human-like shapes that twisted and contorted as they crept closer. My breath hitched in my throat, and I backed away, my heart racing. The shadows moved with an unnatural fluidity, their forms constantly changing. I swung my flashlight around, trying to keep them at bay, but it was no use. They danced just out of reach, circling me like predators toying with their prey. I stumbled back, almost tripping over the uneven floorboards. A faint whisper filled the air, so soft I almost missed it. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew louder, a chorus of voices layered over one another. "Leave, leave now," they chanted, their tone desperate yet commanding. I turned and bolted back toward the main room, the shadows trailing behind me, their movements quickening as if angered by my intrusion. I burst into the main room, gasping for breath. The shadows stopped at the edge of the hallway, lingering just beyond the threshold. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized they were trapped within the hallway, confined to the darkness there. But why? And what would happen if I ventured back in? I didn't want to find out. Trying to calm my racing heart, I decided to explore the other side of the cabin, hoping to find something that could explain what was happening. I walked toward a door on the opposite wall, its paint peeling and faded. With a shaky hand, I turned the doorknob and pushed it open. A gust of cold air rushed out, sending chills down my spine. I stepped inside and immediately felt disoriented. The room was much larger than it had any right to be. From the outside, the cabin looked small, barely big enough for a couple of rooms. But this space stretched out into darkness, the walls and ceiling barely visible in the distance. My flashlight beam flickered and seemed to be swallowed by the vast emptiness. I stepped forward, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As I walked, my footsteps echoed unnaturally, repeating back at me from different directions. I stopped listening. The echoes continued, overlapping until they formed a cacophony of sounds. It was as if the room itself was alive, reacting to my presence. Panic welled up inside me, and I turned back toward the door, but it was gone. The wall where it had been was now a solid surface, no handle, no seams, just darkness. I ran forward, searching for any sign of an exit. My footsteps quickened, but the room stretched on endlessly, with no sign of walls, doors, or even the furniture I had passed just moments before. It was like I was running in place, moving but getting nowhere. My flashlight began to dim, the light flickering as the batteries drained. I cursed under my breath, shaking it frantically to bring it back to life. Just then, the whispers returned, louder and closer this time. "You're lost. You belong here," they chanted, swirling around me in a maddening loop. I screamed in frustration, feeling the walls of the cabin closing in around me. Was this it? Was I trapped here, in this endless void, forever? I fell to my knees, clutching my flashlight as the darkness crept closer. As I sat there, enveloped in shadows, I felt something brush against my shoulder. I jumped up, spinning around to see what it was. In the faint light of my failing flashlight, I noticed something gleaming in the darkness. A mirror, standing alone in the center of the room. It hadn't been there before, I was certain of it. Yet, there it was, its surface reflecting the dim light and the dark shapes around me. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The closer I got, the more distorted my reflection became. My face twisted into expressions I had never made, eyes widening with fear, mouth gaping in a silent scream. I wanted to turn away, but the mirror seemed to hold me in place, forcing me to confront my own image. As I stood there, staring at my warped reflection, the whispers changed. They became clearer, more distinct, echoing from within the mirror itself. "This is where it ends. This is where you see," they murmured, each word sending a chill down my spine. My reflection suddenly shifted, and I saw not just my own face, but the faces of others, men, women, children, all twisted in fear and agony, their eyes pleading with me. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The faces faded, replaced by a single, haunting image. The cabin, just as I had seen it from the outside. But now, it was surrounded by shadows, writhing and moving like living creatures. In the mirror, I watched as the shadows crept toward the cabin's entrance, merging into one dark mass that slowly turned to face me. I knew then that the cabin wasn't just a building. It was a prison, a trap that had ensnared others before me. And now, it was trying to do the same to me. I clenched my jaw, refusing to be another lost soul in this cursed place. Gripping my flashlight, I turned away from the mirror, ready to face whatever was waiting in the darkness beyond. I forced myself to look away from the mirror and turn back to the endless room. To my surprise, the walls were now visible, and directly in front of me was a door. It hadn't been there before, but at this point, nothing about the cabin made sense. I approached the door cautiously, my flashlight flickering weakly in my hand. As I reached for the handle, I felt a chill radiate from it, as if something on the other side was pulling me toward it. I twisted the handle and pushed the door open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the steps creaking under some unseen weight. The air that wafted up was stale, heavy with the scent of mold and damp earth. I hesitated, gripping the frame of the door. Every rational part of me screamed to turn back, to find another way out, but some force urged me onward. I took the first step, and the floorboard groaned loudly beneath me. As I descended, the darkness grew thicker, pressing in on me from all sides. My flashlight's beam flickered, barely illuminating more than a few steps ahead. I had no idea where the stairs led, but I had the sickening sense that they were pulling me deeper into the cabin's heart. Midway down, I heard it again, the whispers, now clear and close. "You're not alone. It's waiting for you," they chanted, echoing off the narrow walls of the staircase. My breath quickened, fogging up the cold air around me. I paused, listening. Footsteps, not mine. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the darkness below. I gripped my flashlight tighter, my palms slick with sweat. The steps grew louder, ascending toward me. I couldn't turn back. Something in the darkness behind me prevented that. So, I pressed on, each step taking me closer to whatever waited at the bottom. Finally, I reached a landing and found myself standing in front of another door. It was old, its wood warped and cracked, but there was something strangely inviting about it, like it held the answers I had been seeking. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, almost like a cellar. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars, each one containing strange, unidentifiable objects floating in murky liquid. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe, and the room seemed to hum with a low, unsettling vibration. I shone my flashlight around, taking in the scene. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it lay a book. The book was old, its cover bound in leather, darkened by age and something else, something that made my stomach turn. Against my better judgment, I approached the table and picked up the book. It felt heavy in my hands, unnaturally so, like it was pulling me down. I opened the cover, and immediately, a gust of cold air rushed out, extinguishing my flashlight. The room plunged into darkness, and I heard the whispering again, louder and more frantic. "Read it, free us," the voices urged, filling my head until I thought I might scream. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, but they were blank, save for one line written in what looked like ink. No, not ink. Blood. It read, "You are the keeper now." A wave of nausea washed over me as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I dropped the book, stumbling back from the table. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a trap, a living thing that fed on the fear and confusion of those who wandered inside. And now, it had its hold on me. The whispers grew louder, rising to a chorus of cries, some pleading, others laughing. I backed up toward the door, my heart racing, every instinct screaming at me to run. As I turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that sent a shockwave through the room. I rushed to the door, pounding on it, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, the humming louder, and the jars on the shelves began to shake violently. It was as if the entire room was coming alive, reacting to my panic. Desperate, I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it back on. The beam was weak, but it illuminated the room just enough for me to see the shadows swirling around me, closing in. I turned to face them, holding the light up as if it could protect me. "I don't belong here," I shouted, my voice echoing back at me in distorted fragments. For a moment, the shadows hesitated, swirling in place. Then, They rushed toward me, enveloping me in darkness. I screamed, but no sound came out. The cold seeped into my bones, freezing me in place. In that instant, I felt the cabin's presence wrap around my mind, pressing down with the weight of its ancient curse. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in the suffocating dark. It could have been seconds, minutes, or hours. Time had lost all meaning. All I knew was that I had to fight back, to break free from the cabin's grasp. I focused on the warmth in my chest, the will to survive that still burned deep inside me. Slowly, I raised the flashlight and turned the beam toward the book lying on the table. As the light hit the cover, the shadows recoiled, hissing like steam hitting hot metal. I took a shaky step forward, keeping the light fixed on the book. "You don't own me," I shouted, my voice breaking through the cacophony of whispers. The room shook violently, the jars rattling on their shelves, the walls groaning as if in pain. I reached out and grabbed the book, holding it high. The shadows screamed, a piercing wail that made my head spin, but I pressed on. "You will not take me," I screamed back, opening the book and tearing out its blank pages. As I did, a blinding light erupted from the torn paper, flooding the room. The shadows shrieked and writhed, dissolving into nothingness. The humming ceased, and the air became still. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, the book now reduced to nothing more than a pile of ashes in my hands. I sat there for a moment, dazed and trembling. The cabin was silent now, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Slowly, I stood up, feeling a strange calm wash over me. I turned to the door and reached for the handle, praying it would open. This time it did. I stepped out into the basement corridor, the cold air brushing against my face like a welcome breeze. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling lighter than the last. When I reached the top, I found myself back in the main room of the cabin. It was different now, somehow brighter, the darkness no longer clinging to the corners. I walked to the front door, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. I pushed it open, and sunlight streamed in, blinding me for a second. I stepped out into the forest, the fresh air filling my lungs, and turned back to look at the cabin one last time. It stood there, silent and still, no longer the monstrous, living entity it had been. I took a deep breath and walked away, never looking back. I had escaped, but I knew the cabin's presence would stay with me forever. It had tried to claim me, to make me its keeper, but I had fought back. And somehow, against all odds, I had survived. If this story of the forgotten cabin, Echoes in the Woods, gave you chills, hit that subscribe button for more terrifying tales. What would you do if you found yourself trapped in a place that defies reality? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoy these creepy encounters with the supernatural.